final stretch of the race, you were exhausted, you heard the blast, and you knew you had to do something.
They tried to stop us, and I leapt over the barricade. Police officers were yelling at me, "Stop, you must stop." And I kept going.
We have experiences in our lives that are branded upon us forever, and this, for me, is one of them. I treated 4 people that day, and 3 of them survived.
Described as a healer, educator, and community leader, she received the Changemaker Award from the Boston Foundation. And the Boston Globe awarded her with Bostonian of the Year. She's been featured in Runner's World, the New York Times, LA Times, the Boston Globe, New Yorker, Time, and People. President Barack Obama honored her for her actions. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Natalie Stavas.
In the aftermath of this event, I was interviewed extensively. They were all asking me the same question. Why? Why did you do that? And then it dawned on me one day that they were asking the wrong question. The question they should have been asking is how? How do we teach people that challenges and chaos are not our enemy? Rather, they serve as an opportunity to improve the human condition and to find meaning in this life. My personal story begins in a very faraway place that the majority of people cannot point out on a map. So I am from Nebraska. Now, do I have any marathon runners in the room? Give a big round of applause to our marathon runners, because it is no easy feat. I hope to teach you some of what I have learned about human creativity, curiosity, and courage. And my goal is to launch you out of this session with a slightly different perspective for how to tackle the challenges in your life, for how to chart new frontiers.
I feel like in times like this, people come together and move forward. And I know I plan on running the marathon again next year. I do.
And I will certainly never forget your efforts and the efforts of all those. So thank you. It's really an honor to meet you.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah.
The world we live in is an incredibly challenging and chaotic place. But within the challenges and within the chaos, there are extraordinary events and people. Now, one of these events occurs every 3rd Monday of April. On this Monday, 30,000 runners put on a pair of running shoes. An entire city completely shuts down. And 1 million spectators line the streets. 1 million people out to watch runners. On this Monday, the longest running marathon in history unfolds. The Boston Marathon, right? Now, if you're a runner, you know we stumble, we suffer, we chafe in the most highly unfortunate places. The crowd in Boston, they always cheer, they drink their Sam Adams beer, and everyone has a phenomenal time. But on April 15th, 2013, at 2:59 p.m., 2 bombs detonated at the finish line. I was 800 meters away from finishing the race when I heard the explosions, and I found myself having to make a choice. Do I run into this? Do I stand here paralyzed in fear, or do I turn and run the other way? Now, we cannot always predict or control the situation we find ourselves in, but what we can influence is how we choose to experience a situation. Now, we are living in a rapidly changing world. It seems like chaos, change, and challenges are the new norm. Think about your world, your intimate world within this world. All the times you've had to reorganize, reconstruct, as we are asked to do more with less as our competition just continues to rise. So I think the most important thing we can ask ourselves is, how do we attack these challenges, right? How do we embrace them? How do we run towards them, all while maintaining a sense of joy, well-being, and balance? So I am from Nebraska. Oh my gosh, so I'm a Nebraskan? I have spent the majority of my adult life trying to disprove the stereotype that people from Nebraska are incredibly awkward human beings. And unfortunately, this awkward family photo continues to haunt me wherever I go. Around the time of this photo, I was very, very hyper, and I was very active. Now, in 2018, we call this attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. But ADHD was not invented by doctors until 1987. But like any good parents do, they chose to experiment on their eldest child. And they had observed, like when I was outside husking corn, catching snapping turtles, doing all the weird things we did in Nebraska, I could come in and I could kind of focus on my homework. So one day they sat me down and they said, Natalie, before you do your homework tonight, we want you to run around the block. And this is literally my block. It is a perfect square that's 4 miles long. 2 amazing things happened. One, Child and Youth Services were never called on my parents for sending their 6-year-old to run 4 miles around this block by herself. But 2, I could come home and I could focus. It wasn't because I was tired, and I didn't realize this until much later in my medical career, that I was high. I was high off of my brain's own neurochemicals. How many of you guys have heard of dopamine? If your mind, if your brain and your body is under the influence of its own natural dopamine, suddenly you find pleasure in extremely simple things in life. You're more alert. You're more optimistic. Dopamine is the neurochemical that allows us to set lofty goals and then maintain those goals. What I do encourage people to do is find ways to increase their body's own natural superchemical. And what is the number one way to do this without taking a pill? It's through being active. So I found myself in medical school, after all this schooling, in medical school in Nebraska. And around the 4th year, I had heard about this place that I wanted to go to, this place called Harvard. It was like this beacon. It was the best training institution for pediatric medicine at that time, and I wanted to go there. So to get into medical school, you have to have letters of recommendation. So one day, I strolled into my medical advisor's office, and I said, I'm going to go to Harvard. And he looked at me, and he said, oh dear. He said, people from Nebraska don't go to Harvard. Everyone in this room has faced a time in their life where you've had adversity, where there's been maybe someone or something or some experience that has been preventing you from accomplishing your vision. But there's also a flip side to that I wanted to share with you. We cannot always predict or control the situation we find ourselves in, but what we can influence is how we choose to experience something. When we're faced with adversity, right, when we're faced with that oppositional force, we really only have 2 choices. We can choose to run towards it, or we turn and run the other way. I was actually the first person from Nebraska ever accepted into Harvard's pediatric training program. It's crazy, right? So what does any avid runner want to do when they get to Boston? Oh, they want to run the Boston Marathon. And so this is how I found myself lacing up my running shoes and boarding a bus to Hopkinton, Massachusetts. And the buses go 5 miles, 15 miles, 20 miles, and you get to about mile 21, and all the novice runners start to realize, oh my God, I have to run all the way back that these buses just drove. Now, there's a very famous phrase in Boston, right on Hereford, left on Boylston. When you reach this signpost, your race is done. You can see the finish line. There's nothing stopping you now. The crowd is deafening. They're going wild. You literally feel like a rock star when you round this corner and see this sign. This is where I was when I heard one explosion and then another. Pure chaos had erupted at the finish line. Nothing was clear except one thing, that people were gravely wounded And this is when I stopped. And I stood there for a moment and I asked myself, do I run into this? I was terrified. Do I stand here paralyzed? Or do I turn and run with everyone else? And in that split second, I made the decision to run into it, to run towards it as fast as I could. All these police officers, they had mobilized. They all had their guns drawn. They didn't know what was going on. And one of them grabbed my shoulder, and he stopped me, and he yelled at me, and he said, "Ma'am, you must stop." And I yelled right back at him, and I said, "I'm a kid's doctor. You have to let me through." We have experiences in our lives that are branded upon us forever, and this, for me, is one of them. I remember getting to bomb scene number 2 and looking down at the ground and asking myself, how am I going to bring this woman back from the dead? So I treated 4 people that day, and 3 of them survived. In the aftermath of this event, I was interviewed extensively. They were all asking me the same question over and over. Why? Why did you do that? And then it dawned on me one day that they were asking the wrong question. The question they should have been asking is how? How do we teach people that challenges and chaos are not our enemy? Rather, they serve as an opportunity to improve the human condition and the lives of the people around us, and to find meaning in this life. So to try and answer this how, I did some research. And I want to share with you some of what we discovered. It all has to do with our brain. This part of your brain that's up on the screen, there's a red dot. That's called your amygdala. Our amygdala is our fight or flight center, but it's also our reward center. When you do something courageous, when you do something that's out of your comfort zone, when you do something that's kind or selfless, this part of your brain lights up like a beacon. Our brain is actually wired to reward us to be courageous. Think about times when you were asked to step up to the plate, right? To do something that is out of your comfort zone. What do we feel as humans? Sometimes our mouth goes dry, our heart beats a little faster, we get butterflies in our stomach, our hands get a little sweaty. Humans often misconstrue this as apprehension or as fear, when in reality we know, we've looked at this, that it is our brain priming us to take action, right? Priming us to be ready, to be courageous. This photo was taken exactly 1 year after the Boston bombing. In this photo, you have the first responders, you have the survivors who lost their limbs that day, and you have the families who lost lives of loved ones. Many of us actually hadn't met each other until this photo, but as we mingled and as we began to talk, we began to realize how important our actions had been in that moment of chaos. Every single one of us acted in such a way that 270 lives were saved. If you live your life in such a way where you commit to exploring your inner courage, you will be fit not just to survive in this incredibly challenging and chaotic world, but to thrive in it. Thank you so much today for your attention. Thank you for everything you're doing for the people that you're working with. Thank you.